We are jumping into the art of becoming a spouse. And if you are one, the art of becoming better spouse. We're going to cover both of the ends on today. So let's jump into it. Mrs. Quay, my spouse. What was it like transitioning from fiance to wife?
Oh.
Was there even a transition? Like, did you just seamlessly just right on in?
No, not at all. And I didn't know you were going to start there, so that's interesting.
Where did you think I was going to start? Where did you want to start?
Let me answer your question. So I did not transition. I think I've told you this before until we had our son.
Say it for the people.
Sam was a clean year old before I was like, oh, I'm married. No turning back now, guys.
Best answer ever.
So ridiculous because I remember clamoring to get married as quickly as possible. All the things. But yeah, I didn't have, and that's where I thought we were going to start was like, what does it look like to like become a different person, to transition who you are. And I think in our case, because we had dated a long time, we dated for years before we got engaged, and then we're engaged for almost a year before we got married. I had convinced myself I was the fiance, right? I was doing all the things, and I didn't know that I wasn't, but it wasn't until our son, our first child, was a year old that I really began to take the level of responsibility that I should have from the beginning. And without getting all the way into my story, I just wasn't honest enough with myself. When it was just two adults, I was like, I can do the things that I want to do for me. And who's hurt by it? Me? Right? And so I had a bad drinking problem. Wasn't until Sam was almost a year old that I finally stopped drinking. But part of that was seeing him pick up a cup I used to have by my side all the time and watching a 1-year-old of 7-month-old drink from a cup that thankfully there was nothing, alcoholic in it. But I was like, oh, you got to get it together. That was a year later, more than a year later. We were almost 2 years married by then. So how to become better, but also what it looks like. And I think the idea of being honest with yourself and about knowing what, who you need to be as a spouse is a starting place for a lot of folks.
Ooh, that being honest with yourself? Well, yeah, and I love the way you put it in terms of like the shift that happened when we had Sam, because there's leeway. There's by yourself, there is so much leeway. And then even, when we got married, there was still some leeway.
We think there is, right?
We think there is. There isn't really. But that first child comes, zero leeway, because not only do we have to be mindful of, the things that he can pick up, like physically, but then at some point he's mimicking.
Very quickly they're mimicking. That's what he was doing. Yeah.
And so now he's reflecting what we do. Like he's picking up our habits, like mannerisms and the thing. And so once you start to see your habits reflected to you, it is a whole other bag. And so, yeah, 1,000% agree. It's a shift. It's a shift. And it's a shift, I will say, most of us don't realize needs to happen until it's too late. Like if I could go back.
But go back. So when were you ready?
What was I ready?
What was the transition like?
Okay.
Fiance
I was like,
to
let's see,
husband.
what is today? Ooh, I don't know. You said when Sam was 1, maybe around there-ish. Because for me, it was about time. You know, my big thing was time management. And how I managed time just for me was one thing. And looking back on it was terrible. But that's not the point. We're not here to talk about my bad time management skills of the past. Not here for all that today, okay? We're not here for all that. But then starting to see how it affected you. Because as we started to spend more time together, just in dating, little things like me being late and not planning things according to what two people would need for an experience to be, you know, an enjoyable one. At first, it was just like, man, she tripping. Why are you tripping about stuff? And then by about a year,
I'm me.
It's just who I am. This is who I am. This is what I do. I'm me. Let me be me. And then,
I was trying to change them.
you know, right? Trying to make somebody different. And then I started to see how it bothered you and how it affected you. I said, okay, this is bigger than just me and my preferences. This is an area where I need to grow. And so, and I'll use the time management as a very specific example, because it was one thing to have to manage time dating.
Well,
Then we got engaged, and now it's like, okay, we are about to get to this place where, as a married couple, we have to manage time together, which sounds great, except there's one problem. You're really good at it. I sucked. And it is so horrifying to be like, we have to do this together, and I'm so bad at this one thing. It is so unbalanced. Not just the ego, but just knowing that at some point we're not going to be able to function if I don't fix this. That's a whole other level. And so, and then you add Sam, where there's even less time, and there's less sleep, and there's less mindfulness. And at that point, if it were up to me, I would have had time management on lock. So then, you know, at 35, 40% of your consciousness, you can get away with it. But it's almost like trying to fix the car while it's doing 80 on the freeway. Like, you can't hop out the car, open the hood, and it's the car's already moving. And so when you said be honest with yourself about who you are, that is prep number one.
yeah.
Is just, who are you? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And then not being so afraid to confront our weaknesses that we leave them there, because at some point it really does just become bigger than you.
Yeah. What you just said is huge, and I feel like it could spin off in a totally different direction. But your car analogy is such a great way to look at something I remember you saying over and over, and I was always like, pshaw, pshaw, disregarding your wisdom, which I have learned to not do some of the time. But I remember the way you described it was that you have to build the habits now because they're harder to build later, and it's less likely you'll even try. I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
But the idea, when we first talked about this a few days ago, part of what we were talking about was this, how complicated folks make it when we're single and looking, when we're, you know, dating and getting engaged, when we're married and trying to evolve, because it becomes about, how do I feel? And, well, what has he been doing for the last season? And, well, where am I going to find the wife? But at the end of the day, it's about who you've conditioned yourself to be, first and foremost. Because if you're out here habitually single, you're going to be married acting habitually single.
Ding, ding, ding.
And if you're married
Married and single is tough sledding.
and moving past that, but back to the, story you just brought up about us, and pick your challenge. I got a million of them, but if there's something that you're doing in your marriage that's a habit, and now you got to try to change it at 80 miles an hour on the freeway, that's what, I want to dig into that, because it's, when you boil it all down and you strip away the dopamine and the excitement, like, we just keep doing things over and over, and we hardwire ourselves to keep doing them over and over. So how do we start to change that, and what does that look like at those different stages? Like, for a single person, how do you look at yourself and say, like, ooh, these habits aren't going to serve me when I'm married?
My God.
Or engaged, because you're getting engaged.
Well, yeah. And hey, listen, some people just right to it. But I think that's a fantastic question. Is trying to figure that out. Because if you don't know how these habits register, oh man, I hesitate to say this, but I think there are some, unfortunately, for everybody, there is a habit that we have that we don't know the full extent of the damage it does until it affects someone we know or love or are intimately connected with. Everybody has that one thing where it's like, people will tell you till they are blue in the face, but it isn't until you see it actually have that hard effect before the decision to make the change. Which is why, coming back to what you said, like, how honest can we really be with ourselves about our habits? Because some of our habits are just that. They're habits. We've confused them with saying, oh, this is just, as we're joking, this is just who I am. This is how God made me. This is just
No, it's
how
just
I
what
was
you do
born.
over and over and over and over.
No, it is a habit. It is a conditioned habit. It was a decision at some point. It is a decision that keeps being repeated over and over and over again. And at some point, the results from that decision have to not be enough for you to be the best version of who you are in order for that thing to change.
Say that again.
You have to get to a point where this habit is not producing on the level you need in order for you to be the best you. And so, which then begs the question, are we being honest enough with ourselves to acknowledge when we are actually trying to be our best us? Or are we just trying enough to say we're trying? Or are we actually trying in the effort to affect a change and grow?
So every time you say, are we lying to ourselves? I think about how we have these habits of creating environments for our condition to thrive, whatever that is. Like, that's our default is, ooh, I really like eating cookies. Let me be around other people who like eating cookies. Because who wants to be the only one eating cookies when everybody's fasting?
A fair point.
Or when all they bring are the gluten-free things without any sugar in them. Like, who wants to be the cookie person in that circle of friends? No one. Who wants to be the one dude that's always like, let's go to that club, when all of your friends are like, sorry, home with the wife and kiddos? Like, that's not fun for you. Wow. And so we find all these people who look like and act like and think like and talk like us, and then wonder why it's hard to be honest with ourselves.
Yo, that's a major key. The circle of friends. Whew, almost fell off this couch. We have to be mindful of what habits do our circle of friends have? Because you're right. Depending on what your habit is, your circle of friends either reinforce that habit or they amplify it, but you're not gonna hang, I have something in my eye. Oh,
Do you need me to help you?
I got it, thank you.
Because I was ready to go
I
boomerang.
saw. I know.
Robin Givens all the way. That
See,
was very-
clearly our friends are silly. So that's where that habit came from. Well, all of everything you said is right. Like, are we ready to be honest enough to not just look at ourselves, but then the next step is, okay, what's my friend circle rocking like? What are their habits?
And do I want to be like them when I grow up?
Oh,
That's the simple way, because sometimes we don't see our habits.
nope.
But if you're honest about who your friend is, do you want to be who they are when you grow up? Is that
This is hard questions. Hard questions. And then when you have kids, it's like, are these people I want around my kids? Do I want my kids to replicate their habits? All the questions. But I think these are necessary questions in terms of, what it is to become a spouse or becoming a better spouse, is being able to ask ourselves those really hard questions and have honest answers and then act on it.
Yeah. So what does action look like? How do we do this? Like, pretend that we're a single or engaged or married person. For one, how do you pick out these habits that need to change? We'll just start there, and then we'll get to how do you change them, which is maybe more simple.
Ooh, picking out the habits that need to change.
Right? Because it's different for everybody, but there's some truths about, like, it's just the word for me. My ways are not your ways. So we're Bible believers, and at some point, a lot of what we're talking about is, in a spiritual sense, it's talked about mind renewal and about changing your ways, but it's one thing to read a guide and to have a word from God about how to change. And just for everyone, what does that look like? How do you pick out what these habits are that need to change?
I think it starts with who it is you are set to become. Because if you don't know who it is you're trying to become, if you don't have an idea of this version of you that is necessary for where you're going, then it's really hard to just take habits and just start changing them. Because if I still believe that the current version of me is the most up-to-date and best version, not just now, but ever, right? I'm living my best life and it's not going to change. And this is perfect for me. Changing habits doesn't make any sense for me because the habits that I've have brought me to the place where I am now, and I am satisfied. So I think part of it is getting to a place where you are content, but you are not satisfied with just staying where you are. And then the next part of it is, okay, now that I know that there is a maturing that needs to take place, there's an area I need to grow in to be to reach this version of me that's next. What are the habits that lead to being that person? So for me, and time management is my battle, but I'm winning. But at some point I had to say, all right, I want to be a person that manages my time better. Then I need to start doing little things like, writing stuff down. Just write it down. If I have the thought, I should probably write it down. Then the next step is, where can I put it so that I can see this thing and actually do the thing I wrote down? And then it becomes, okay, this thing that I'm thinking about doing, what are the steps I need to do in order to make this thing happen? How much time do I? It's like each step brings about a specific set of questions that allows you to get to the next step as you answer those questions. So it's sequential, but it very much starts with, okay, for where I'm going, what type of person do I need to be? And what does that type of person do?
which is a big one. Because I think I know for me, the world hasn't seen who I'm supposed to become. So then it's like, well, who? Where do I find them? But somewhere in, I mean, you shared so much wisdom. But I think the word you repeated a couple times was grow. And I think there is space in that. There's something everybody can lay hold of in the idea that even if you want to be a boss, but all you know about a boss is like the bosses you see on TV or the toxic manager at your actual place of employment. Even if you don't have a specific model for what you're doing, if the idea is you have to be able to grow. Like, where are you growing? How is there room for growth? Where are you evolving? And is that even a part of your goal right now? Or is it just, living my best life? And so the idea of there being room to grow, I think, leaves room for someone to look at. These are the habits, and then these are the ways that I can start to change them too.
Oof.
This is interesting. Okay, so you started to talk through how you identify the habits that need to change. And then you also talked a little bit about what that looks like to actually change the habits. Take me through becoming a better spouse.
Oh, let's go.
Because it's one thing to be like, okay, I want to become a spouse, right? And we've talked in other episodes about dating.
Yep.
And some of this stuff like being honest with yourself and changing the way that we look at dating sets up this conversation, because becoming a spouse is not who turns me on the most and the most consistently.
Ooh, boy.
Don't go there. We covered that. So that's not the goal for finding your spouse. So pretend that you have, not pretend because you are, but this process of becoming a better spouse. You've been married for, say, 10 years or 5 years or 30 years. Why? We've got this far.
So why?
The kids are in college.
Right. What is we doing
I'm
now?
living my best life again. And I remember when I was 18, we about to go back.
Right, we going back.
Ain't no time like the past. Where do you find the compulsion, or, what does it look like? How do you prompt yourself? Like, where do you find that to become a better spouse? What's that look like?
Ooh. I think it starts with realizing there's nobody's perfect. I haven't nailed anything. Like, I can confidently say there's nothing in terms of our marriage that I've 100% max capacity perfection nailed. Nothing. There's not a single thing in our marriage I could be like, I can think of one thing.
I couldn't resist. You just kept going. Go on.
And I'm still perfecting that as well. Hallelujah.
Go on.
Yo, I'm at every point I'm like, I can do that better. I can do it better. Listening, I can listen better. Cooking, I can cook better. I can or more often, or more like there's always something in our marriage that can be done better. Always. There's if you ever feel like in your marriage it's perfect, something's missing. Now, that doesn't mean we can't be content with where it is, and that doesn't mean we can't enjoy where we are and be happy with it and be more than that, be thrilled with it. But there's always something. And then on top of that, not just talking about the things we do well, but I guarantee there's something I don't do well. Guarantee it. And so now it becomes, I can either rest on my strengths and coast on the strengths and just have the weaknesses be whatever they are, incidentals, and but I can just keep hammering on the strengths, or if we're really talking about being a better spouse, I can work on the weaknesses too and still get, better at the things that I do well at, but then actually take steps at those weaknesses. And so taking steps with those weaknesses tends to also then be like, all right, what habits do I have in place that got those weaknesses where they are to begin with? And so then you start to change those habits. And when you make those adjustments, the weaknesses become at first neutral. Because you just don't go from weakness to strength. It starts off in neutral and then eventually it becomes, if we're persistent enough, a strength. But I think that's where it starts, is humbling ourselves enough to be like, I don't have it all on lock. And then taking the next step to have conversations with, like, babe, what can I do better? And actually being willing to act on it, answer when we hear it.
Being able to receive correction. Oh boy, there's so many things.
Go into all of the things.
No. But as you were talking about, like, becoming better, one of the things that was standing out is this idea that it is about your individual growth and evolution and improvement for yourself. And what is interesting, like bringing it all the way back to start, is when we first started having this conversation, part of what was fascinating to me, and you commented the same, was this idea that there are conversations in the dating world where one person they're not engaged, but one person is basically like, yo, I need to become a better version of myself before I can do this. And the other person is not, it turns into anything other than okay. And I want to kind of bring it back there because it's so amazingly healthy to be able to recognize that and vulnerable to acknowledge it. And yeah, I wish that, because I've been in that place eons ago. I'm sure someone said that to me, or I said it to someone. I'm sure. I probably wasn't smart enough to say that. But what does that look like? How do you respond to that? Why do folks try to make that about themselves? I don't even know what I'm trying to get at.
No, I totally get it.
I love the idea of it being about improvement for yourself as opposed to for the other person.
The struggle with that, when it involves another person, is, like I always say, you can't rush revelation. But we want, because when we find that person and we're like, yo, he's the one, she's the one, we believe a sign of the one is that revelation happens for us both at the same time, at the same rate. That's the only way that they're the one. That's it. I caught it, you caught it at the same time, just like that. Wow, well, you're the one. And that's not realistic. There are going to be things that you catch before I do. There'll be things that I catch before you do. There are going to be areas in personal development where you will develop quicker than I will, and areas where I develop quicker than you do. So it really comes down to balancing the rate of adoption of change between two people. And this is super hard because we feel the most comfortable when both of us are changing at the same time and adopting in the same way and at the same rate. But if one of us it's happening faster, for lack of better words, faster in us than it is in the other person, you feel the difference, and that discomfort becomes well, I don't know if they're the person for me because they're not ready to change at the rate that I'm ready to change. Like that's why one of the scariest things that we've laughed probably more than we should have, but it's still funny nonetheless, is, God told me, you're my wife, or God told me you're my husband. And I'm always like, did you have a follow-up? Like, okay, God said this to you, but did God tell you to tell me? Did God
Always
tell you to say this
follow-up
right now? Because just because it was revealed to you doesn't mean that God then revealed it to the other person at the exact same time in the exact same way.
Oh my gosh. Can we have a public service announcement for the saints? Okay.
Get the
This is
saints.
a public service announcement
Grab
for
the
every
saints.
believer in the Bible who hears from the Lord, and I hope we all do. You should if you know him. When you hear from him and he gives you a message, ask him permission, advice, guidance on whether to share it.
There it
That's
is.
all. That's all. That's my PSA. Is it supposed to be told? Because not everything is supposed to be told, and sometimes we get, and it's just blah. The first person, and it's a lot of times it's not for anybody but you. That was all.
Yep.
PSA over.
PSA over. But that touches on it though, because it's that's what makes it so challenging. Is all right. Yes, I'm glad you're ready to be married. I may not be ready to be married. That doesn't mean we're not for each other. It just means I know who I need to be in order to be ready for that responsibility. I am not that person now. I have work to do. And either you are willing to, date as we develop, which I would like to believe dating is for. I'd like to believe that there's a period of development in dating that takes place. But more likely than not, once you throw out that I'm ready to be married and the other person isn't ready, it becomes a whole like, oh my God, you must not be the one. So for becoming a better spouse, I think we can both agree it comes down to that rate of change that has to take place in each of us. And so acknowledging, hey, my rate of change in a given area in my life may happen quicker or it may happen slower than it would maybe for you. And the same going in the other direction. But if we're both trying to get better, we have to accept that that rate of change not only has to take place, but it's just going to be different.
Yeah, that's good. I think tying in folks who are single looking to become a spouse.
Yeah.
At some point, it's, how open are you to receiving correction, and how honest are you with yourself about where you need to grow? A lot of times we tend to think like you can just become this perfect person who's weddable, right?
Yes.
And there's nothing to attain except that space of being adaptable, being able to receive correction, and being able to be honest with yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, being able to see yourself. That's a great, clear sign of, all right, I can take some steps because I can at least honestly look at myself and see my warts and my areas where I need to get better, and then my own, I could see those things. And then, once you meet that person and they point them out, like, we're at least used to being able to hear it. That's a big one.
Yeah.
I think we'll land there.
I like it.
All right. Well, fam, you jumped in with us. We were here. Now we're leaving. Appreciate y'all rocking with us. Hey, let us know in these comments, did any of this register with you? Did you feel like you were given some tools that allow you to feel like, hey, I am becoming ready to be a spouse, or I'm already a spouse and I feel like I could take a couple of these and I can get better and I can better the marriage and better my relationship? Whatever those things are, we want to hear about them. Share them in the chat. Go ahead, drop them down in there. And if there are things that you feel like we should talk about, by all means, we got the couch, we here. Go ahead and put them down there too. We'll grab up a couple. They may show up in an episode somewhere down the line. Till then, love y'all. Like, subscribe, share. You know the drill. Sharing is caring. Go ahead on and care by sharing. See y'all later. Peace.